This is just just...
I'm sorry. Is there something specific you want me to say?
How long have we been podcasting?
Oh, gosh.
We burst into giggles. All right. Hi, this is Evan Bernstein from the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, and you're listening to the Skeptic Zone.
I can do that. Hi, everyone. This is Evan Bernstein from the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, and you're listening to the Skeptic Zone.
Oh, voice like honey, Evan. That was so good.
Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone, episode number 454 for the 2nd of July 2017. Richard Saunders here with you from New York City, New York. What a wonderful, wonderful time I've had over the past few days. First, a couple of days up in Connecticut, staying with my dear friend Evan Bernstein, who you heard briefly at the beginning of the show. Then a trip down through Connecticut to New York City with Steve Novella. And that was an interesting trip, a lot of good conversation. And for the past few days, I've been taking part in Nexus, the Northeast Conference of Science and Skepticism, right here in New York City. It's got one more day to run. Sadly for me, only a half a day for travel reasons. I've got to catch a flight. But what a wonderful time I've had so far. I've been trying to get lots of interviews for Skeptic Zone listeners. They will be coming up in the coming weeks. But a little taste of New York on this week's episode. The last report, the last story, is my impressions of Times Square, where I join Jocelyn Novella, Julia Novella, and Autumn Novella. They took me on a little tour. So coming up at the end of the show, a walk around the madness, the wonder, the spectacle that is Times Square, New York. And I hope it gives you a little sense of it, a little taste, a bit of a flavour. But yes, lots of interviews and more in-depth things coming up in the coming weeks from this conference, including a nice chat I had with none other than James Randi. And what a pleasure it was to catch up with James Randi. I haven't seen him for a little while. And apart from anything else, it just reminds me how much we laugh together, James Randi and I. It's something very special. But before we get to all that, coming up at the top of the show, it's Heidi Robertson, the Raw Skeptic, with a very interesting and different interview. She interviews Dr. Karl Kruszelnicki, who talks about just about everything you can possibly imagine. And this interview was conducted as they were driving along in a car. Heidi was driving, Dr. Karl had the microphone, and, well, you'll hear it for yourself. Coming up to kick off the show, the Raw Skeptic Report, Dr. Karl and Heidi Robertson driving along in a car. Oh, the lengths my reporters will go to. Then it's Brew Ha Ha Science from Australia Science TV. This week, Kelly Wong tells us about the census, the recent government census here in Australia, and some of the findings. Then to round off the show, it's part 2 of our beekeeping story from last week with Dr. Eugenie Scott. And this week, Jeannie and I sit down and she talks more about the science of beekeeping and bees and things like plagues and mites and things that affect bees. Very interesting. The science, some of the science of beekeeping. Stay tuned at the end of the show. I will have a few more things to say about this conference, the Northeast Conference of Science and Skepticism. But now it's time for me to, well, I can't really run anywhere. I'm in a hotel room here in New York. In fact, I've just left a very nice evening with lots of skeptical friends here in a bar a few blocks away. I snuck away to produce the Skeptic Zone. So it's time for me to, well, let me see. Open the minibar, maybe? I don't know. Raid them. There's not much here to raid. I'll figure out something. Well, I'm figuring out something. Maybe I'll order out for some bagels and root beer. Maybe I'll do something like that. Well, I figure that out. I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. It's the Raw Skeptic Report with Heidi Robertson.
Hello everyone. Heidi Robertson from the Northern Rivers Vaccination Supporters in your ears today. Last Friday, the 23rd of June 2017, I was privileged to speak with Dr Karl, who was up my way in Byron Bay for the Star Stuff event. You may have heard the recent promos for this event on the Skeptic Zone, and more about that in a separate report. Now, if you are Australian, you will know who Dr Karl is, but for our overseas listeners who may not be aware, Dr Karl is pretty much Australia's equivalent of America's Bill Nye, the science guy. Relating Dr Karl's qualifications and achievements would take far too long, so if you'd like to learn more about him, you can go to his website, drkarl.com. Dr Karl took some time out from his trip up here to speak with the students of Mullumbimby High School. In this interview, I talk with him about his presentation to the students, as well as some other stuff. I was speaking with him whilst driving him to his Byron Bay accommodation, with him holding my microphone, so I do apologise in advance for the sometimes stilted sentences on my part. Turns out I'm not as good as I thought I would be at multitasking. And with that said, I hope you enjoy the interview. All right.
And ready to roll?
It's running.
Okay, here we go. Interview on the 23rd of the 6th. We're out the car park.
Yeah, we're on the move. We're on the move in Mullumbimby.
Rolling out the car park past the burnt upside-down cars.
No exit that way. Okay, here we go. Thank you for joining us on the Skeptic Zone, Dr Karl.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Well, I've been looking very much forward to meeting with you. I'm a bit of a fangirl.
I'm not worthy, but thank you.
So you're actually in town for the Star Stuff Festival, which is found at starstuff.com.au, and it's been described online as being a lineup of Australia's most renowned astrophysicists, cosmologists, I think, astronomers, astrophotographers, and you're one of the keynote speakers, so that's exciting.
Even though I'm not a professional astronomer, cosmologist or photographer, but I do write about that, but I listen to the heavy guys because they're the ones who give me the stuff that I plagiarise. I follow the motto of plagiarise, let no one's work ever evade your eyes, and so I turned into pretty stories.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, before we get to Star Stuff, you were actually talking at a high school, the local high school, Mullumbimby High School, which is, I don't know if you knew, Richard Saunders actually went to Mullumbimby High School when he was a young chap.
Ah.
And you were there to talk to them about all things science. I really liked the format of your talk, actually, because you were talking to them about the changes they could expect to see in various fields of science over the course of their lifetime. Can you tell us a bit more about the topics that you talked about today with the students?
Yes, things will change dramatically in their working lives. So I dealt with 5-ish major topics, being changes that will happen in their working lives in the field of computers/IT, and going into things such as the 100,000 people who already have computers buried in their brains to help them get through their day. That was computers. And then I also dealt with engineering and pointed out that science is about discovering stuff that's not known. Engineering is about building stuff that's not known, and how that's going to change, including the big changes coming along with 3D printing. Then went into genetics and went out on a bit of a limb, pointing out that there's a reasonable chance that some of them will be in the first generation to live forever. By forever, I mean 5,000 years of age with a healthy 18 to 25-year-old body, kept that way by genetics, whereas I'll be in the first generation to die. I'm cool, don't worry about it. And the changes that will happen with genetics, and I deliberately did not mention the weaponization of genetics. That's just too easy. So if you want to, you can make a virus that had a time delay in it, and that was as nasty as Ebola. Now, Ebola is very nasty, but it's really silly because it kills you almost immediately. What you want to do is infect everybody, then kill them, and then you can trigger it with any particular characteristic you like. For example, you don't like red-haired people, and then pick racial characteristic or phenotype of your choice and then kill off any of those people. So that's the sort of stuff that's coming, but I deliberately did not mention that to them. Didn't want to make them too sad. And then into the fourth topic, which is basic physics, and that's a really big field with now we've finally understood mass, and I just barely touched upon the fact that there are so many major problems we have with physics today, like dark matter, dark energy, and the fact that the neutrino has mass. There's all these problems in physics. We've got a whole bunch of theories that are sort of held together with gaffer tape. It's almost as bad as God's design of the knee. That's how bad it is. But it's still pretty good, and we've got to come up with something new in physics. And then talked about the environment with regard to global warming. And then, to give them an overview after those four topics, went into the sixth topic, which is world view and the concept of a moonshot, where a country spends hundreds of billions of dollars and decades on a single goal. And in the case of China, they got 4 moonshots, whereas we in the West have 1 moonshot, which was to bring peace and democracy to Iraq and Afghanistan. We've spent $1 billion a day since 2003 on it, and I don't think it's looking like we're getting our value back. And then went into the 3 positive notes that we can not only halt global warming. I didn't mention that we could reverse it with 80 million units, each the size of a container. We can actually, once we've stopped pumping carbon dioxide, we can start pulling it out and avoid that 5 to 8 metre ocean level rise by the end of the century. And also the fact that the kids are smarter than their parents by 9 IQ points, the Flynn effect. And also we are living in the most peaceful time in history. Don't believe the press when they follow their mantra of if it bleeds, it leads. They're just lying to you. And I stuffed all of that into 1.25 hours with 15 minutes of Q&A. Sure, that's my job.
And you're still talking at the same rate that you did during the entire presentation, which was extremely impressive, I have to say. That's the first time I'd ever heard of the Flynn effect, and I thought that the students were all quite a little bit excited about that.
Hang on. You didn't read my 38th book? Oh, dear listener, like a knife into my heart. Oh, don't worry, you can get it for free on the ABC homepage. Look up on Google, Dr Karl, ABC, and Flynn, Flynn, and you too can read for yourself how the IQ is going up by 9 IQ points every generation. Oh my God.
Now, it's got to have something to do with the World Wide Web, surely.
It was happening before the World Wide Web began in 1932 when we first started measuring it with the intakes into the American military, and we started measuring the IQ was going up then, and since then we've measured it happening not just in American military but American citizens and citizens around the world in any country where they are wealthy enough to afford an IQ test as part of their education system.
What is going on with that then? How do we explain that?
We cannot explain it. What we do know is that, firstly, people are thinking more in their jobs rather than doing. So in 1900, 3% of people sat down and thought. Today it's 35%. Secondly, we've gone more abstract. So we think about concepts such as mammals rather than dogs chasing cats. But it's still officially mysterious.
Well, there you go. And another fun fact that I did not know were there are 6,273 different varieties of rice.
Yes, and we almost lost all the rice on the planet when the rice grassy stunt virus started attacking all the rice on Earth. And the scientists went looking in the 1970s and they found the number of strains resistant to this virus was 1. Not 100, 1. And the scientists had found it in India in the mid-1960s. And if we had not found that variety of rice and bred into it, there would be no rice, korma, no fried rice, no rice for curry. People don't realise how close we came to not having any rice.
I certainly didn't realise that, and I think you were saying that it actually makes up 25% of the world's staple caloric intake, is it?
Yeah, it's a ballpark figure there. Rice is an incredibly important product in the world today for nutrition for roughly 1/5 of humanity.
Okay, so this weekend, it's very exciting. Is there anyone in particular you're particularly looking forward to hearing?
All of them, because each of them has expertise in areas that I have zero expertise. I'm a generalist, they're specialists, so I'm turning up for all of the talks just to learn more. And the amazing thing is that when you go, you think, oh yeah, I know that, what? And then you learn something new. So I'm hanging out for everybody.
I'm just so glad that this event is coming to Byron Bay. I was interviewing Dylan, the O'Donnell, the event coordinator, the other day. I was a little bit bemused when he described how several people thought that this was actually going to be an astrology event. Did you hear about that?
An official government body in charge of funding for events like this misread astronomy for astrology because they thought it was Byron Bay, and therefore assumed that you couldn't have astronomy, you could have only astrology. And we do live in a strange part of the world up here, where on one hand they care more about the environment than practically anywhere else in Australia, but they do not care about their children because they've got the lowest rates of vaccination in Australia.
Well, I did particularly like the part in your talk where you said to the students, children get vaccinated. I really wanted to stand up and cheer at that point in time. Actually, talking about vaccination, and many of our listeners on the Skeptic Zone have seen the Vaccination Chronicles, the documentary written and produced by Richard Saunders, and of course you starred in that yourself. And you were in that documentary, which, by the way, if you haven't seen it, it is well worth seeing. It's only about 26 minutes long and it's freely available on YouTube. But Dr. Karl, you were saying that you spent some time as a medical student up here, I think in Nimbin in particular. Can you tell us, do you remember the story that you relayed for the Skeptic Zone, the Vaccination Chronicles, regarding that particular experience that you had with a patient when you were a medical student?
It's such a tragic story that I can never forget it. You see, as a medical student, you're taught to observe people, and gradually as you go through, you get better and better. And part of it is what they laughingly call the funny walk. So you learn to recognise the difference between somebody who's walking that way because they've got a stroke, they've got Huntington's chorea, they've got Parkinson's disease. And so I was there as a medical student in an office with a doctor, shadowing the doctor in Nimbin, and just sitting there quietly asking, not saying anything, just keeping my big mouth shut and my big ears open. And in came this mother and father and their 16-year-old child. And as the 16-year-old child came in, it was perfectly obvious that the kid had polio. Just obvious. If you've seen it, you know it. It's there. The sky's blue. The kid's got polio just from the walk, and it's so rare in Australia. You just don't see it. And I was so surprised that I looked at the doctor, who then looked at me, and we both were thinking the same thing. How did this kid get polio? So we both kept. I said nothing. He was very good. He kept his big mouth shut and just asked questions. So what's happening? And so the story was that they'd gone to India, and their kid had got a sore leg, hip, knee, something, and there's something wrong with his bones. Can you organise an X-ray? And so the doctor did a series of neurological, musculoskeletal, physical examinations, and it was perfectly clear that the kid had polio. And then he asked the question, has your son been vaccinated against polio? And they started getting really angry. And at that moment I realised that they'd been thinking about that themselves, and they started throwing stuff around the office and stormed out, saying that they were going to sue the doctor for suggesting that the question, has your child been immunised against polio, was important. And the kid, it turned out, had polio, and then would have that limp for the rest of their life, would get a little bit better, and then later, 30, 40 years down the line, go into the post-viral syndrome, post-polio syndrome, and then get worse again, all because the parents had deliberately chosen not to get their kid vaccinated, and there was something going on in their heads where they were thinking, well, polio is not real and vaccinations don't work. And the other part was going, but our kid has got it and we didn't get him vaccinated. We went to a country where there's lots of polio everywhere. And I feel very sorry for both the parents and the kid. And that's an example of why you should get vaccinated. Everybody get vaccinated. The only dangerous vaccination is the one you don't get.
Yeah, well said. One of the main things we hear at Northern Rivers vaccination supporters with people that don't want to vaccinate their children is, well, why should I vaccinate against things that are no longer around? But you've just illustrated that point, very clearly that, well, things like polio in countries that are still endemic, and I think it's down to 3 countries now that still have polio as endemic. But it's really only a plane ride away, isn't it?
Yeah. Now, look, let me just back up. I said the only dangerous vaccine is the one you didn't take. Okay, let's just go deep into the statistics. Let's go deep into the statistics. Paracelsus said all drugs are poisons, what matters is the dose. So there have been occasions where people have had reactions to polio vaccines or any other vaccine, but overwhelmingly, if you look at the numbers, you are much safer if you get vaccinated than if you don't. Overwhelmingly, you're much safer on the plane trip than on the taxi ride to the airport. So just to be absolutely rigorous, you've got to look at the big picture, and the big picture is you get safer. So why should you get vaccinated against some disease that's no longer around? Because it's no longer around, and by getting vaccinated, you'll make sure it's not around for the next generation. I was there in the kids' hospital in the early 1990s, when after a gap of 20 years of deaths from whooping cough, we had 0 deaths from whooping cough. We had the first death from whooping cough, and that was after a TV series had shown what they said was both sides of the story, giving equal weight to the vaccination and anti-vaccination story, so they could sell more dog food or whatever it was that was going on in the ads in between. And as a result, this kid died, and I spoke to the parents, and they said, but insert name of TV presenter said that there's an argument both ways, and so we thought we'd just not do anything. And that person, their kid's death, was directly responsible to hearing the words of that person on TV. Their kid died because that person on TV said those words, and the kid didn't have to die. And now we're finding something else with whooping cough, which my daughter is suffering from. So the thing is that whooping cough vaccine, out of all the vaccines that we have, is the least effective vaccine. Some are really effective. You get vaccinated against measles, mate, you're set for life. Whooping cough, the vaccine is not as effective and you need top-ups. And it turns out that if you do get whooping cough, because the vaccine was not 100% efficacious, you'll end up with, even though you've been vaccinated, you'll still get a very weak form of whooping cough, which happened to one of my daughters. And as a result, even though she'd been vaccinated, she still got something that has left her lungs a little bit damaged forever. And it turns out, and this new syndrome is just being explored now thanks to the anti-vaxxers, we now have this brand new disease where the lungs are left after even though you've been vaccinated, you still get a weak form of whooping cough. Your lungs are left in a hyperimmune state. Now, the immunologists have a saying, the lungs are a dumb organ, and they don't need to, but the lungs react against the whooping cough and everything else. So that later in life, after you've had a fairly distressing bit of whooping cough and you cough for ages and finally get over it and your eyes get a bit bloodshot and you're sick of it for a couple of months, but then for the rest of your life you're left with whooping cough hypersensitivity of the lungs, where any infection can damage you. And a friend of my daughter, young, got pneumonia and would have died if it wasn't for antibiotics, and she'd been vaccinated as well. So even though whooping cough has been pushed back a lot because of the herd immunity dropping, and because the vaccine is not the best vaccine in the world because we're just not that good, it was better than not having anything, but it's still not as perfect as measles, we still end up with some effects. But maybe 10, 20 years we'll have a better vaccine. But of course, if we had herd immunity, we wouldn't have to have the better vaccine.
Very, very good. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for that. We're nearly at your place of residence for the next couple of days, so we might wrap up there, but I'm looking forward to the weekend and looking forward to you speaking again, and hopefully we can catch up at some point and have a coffee and another gas bag.
I do like coffee, the world's most popular legal drug with overwhelmingly so many good effects, but only in observational studies. And so by an observational study, I mean you get 300,000 nurses in America and you follow them for 3 decades. And what you find is if they have coffee, they have a longer life expectancy, lower heart disease, better outcomes with prostate cancer, and better outcomes with diabetes, type 2 diabetes. And there are so many people with type 2 diabetes that if they were a country by themselves, they'd be the 3rd largest country on earth, and with liver disease and mouth and skin cancers as well. But these are not your peer-reviewed, double-blind, randomised control. Just dump them there. They're not your peer-reviewed, randomised, double-control tests. They're just simply observational, so they're just a hint. We still need to do the better studies. So I do like coffee. If you're going to give up anything, here's something. If you want to give up something in going down a pathway of getting healthier, whatever that is, don't give up coffee. Give up fats or something. Don't give up coffee.
Cigarettes. Give up cigarettes.
Give up cigarettes. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Karl.
Thank you. Is it still working? Oh, look, both a little... Oh, look, they're going up and down just like magic. We must be on radio or something.
Thank you.
The Skeptic Magazine, the journal from Australian skeptics. Subscribe online to the world's 2nd oldest skeptical magazine. Visit www.skeptics.com.au and click the publications link. You can also find there over 30 years of back issues free to download. The Skeptic, the magazine from Australian skeptics. And now, direct from the cafe at Australia's Science Channel, it's Brew Ha Ha with Kelly Wong.
The moment we've all been waiting for is finally here. The first round of data from Census 2016 have been published, and unlike Census fail, things have held up a little better this time. So far it reveals some pretty basic stuff about all 23.4 million of us. How old are we? Where do we live? Where do we come from? But we notice that the census is missing some questions. Ones that could be used to help make better decisions to tackle one big problem in particular, climate change. We reckon that in the future, the census should ask us about our environmental impact and carbon footprint. Like, how often do you recycle? Do you use a driverless car? How often do you eat red meat? When was the last time you bought new clothes? We want to know how Australians are using up resources. If we value this as a nationwide measurement, we'd be a big step closer to practical, sustainable change. It could inform infrastructure, allocate resources, and help make decisions about our nation's future, just like the rest of the census data.
For more Brew Ha Ha and Australian science, head for www.australiascience.tv.
Hallo aan alle Nederlandse luisteraars. Op dit moment bent u aan het luisteren naar de Skeptic Zone, voor wetenschap en kritisch nadenken. Voor meer informatie ga naar www.skepticzone.tv.
Now for part 2 of our beekeeping story with Dr. Eugenie Scott. Last week we went to her backyard and collected the honey right from the hive. This week, Jeannie and I sit down and she discusses some of the science behind beekeeping. Well, the biscuits have gone. They've gone into us. And the honey.
And everybody's sitting around very full, and I hope content. I am content.
Oh, yeah, absolutely delightful. Now, let's talk about some of the science when it comes to bees and beekeeping, because my brief experience yesterday doing what we did, gathering the honey and looking inside the hives and seeing, you were pointing out the drones and the larvae, we could see
the
that.
different castes of bees.
Yeah, it's
drones and workers. Didn't see a queen, but not for lack of trying. Well, we didn't try real hard.
We didn't try real hard, but maybe it's not. Is it good to spot the queen? Is it best to leave her alone?
No, it's a good idea to know that you have a queen. But we did see, it wasn't on camera, but we did see eggs. So that means that within the last couple of days, she had a queen. So far, so good. We saw
that's the neighbor we visited earlier, later on, yes.
Anna Carlson.
Yeah, just up the street, of course, there are lots of hives around Berkeley.
Berkeley is thick as thieves with hives. When I walk over, my next door neighbor has a hive, and when I walk over to the grocery store, I always kind of stop and I look over one fence because they've had hives, and I always kind of check them out and see how they're doing.
Yeah.
Oh yes, there are bees flying in and out, or their hives crashed over the winter. I felt really bad because their hives died out.
Oh,
and that is actually an interesting thing. The survival of these hives. I'm a backyard beekeeper, but of course here in California, beekeeping is a huge agricultural industry because bees are pollinators for a lot of crops, especially the tree crops, almonds, stone fruit, lots of different products are, and it's not just California, Florida, other parts of the United States where they have, especially trees, they use a lot of bees. And what happens is commercial beekeepers in California, most of them actually are in California because this is sort of the home base for agricultural production in the United States. This is a huge agricultural part of the country. And so the commercial beekeepers have hives here, and they'll have 100, 200, 1,000 hives. I mean, they can have huge numbers of hives. And when the almond season is done, they'll put their hives stacked, 5, 7, whatever deep, and drive them to the Midwest, or drive them to Florida, or drive them someplace else.
So the portable bees.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. So, they'll let them out. The bees will orient and figure out where they are, and then they'll go forth and
do their stuff.
Pollinate.
Wow.
Clover crops, alfalfa. There's lots of different crops that honeybees are used to pollinate. And in not just the United States, but especially here in North America, there's a real problem with what's called colony collapse disorder.
Yes, we've heard about that. It makes the news. Sometimes it's a little bit sensationalist, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot of pseudoscience involved.
Yes.
But, I think as skeptics, I think we know that pseudoscience thrives when there's a lack of a scientific consensus. And that's perfectly reasonable. If you don't really have a solid scientific consensus, there are a lot of competing hypotheses, and, people can attach to one or the other. What happens in most cases is that sooner or later there's enough experimental or other kinds of tests to rule out certain hypotheses, and a set of opinions coalesce around some explanations, and then eventually everybody gets convinced, and so you move on. And of course, as we know as skeptics, it's often the case that even with a consensus, some of the pseudoscience promoters cling to outmoded ideas. And of course, we have lots of examples of that in climate science, anti-vaccination, any number of
it goes
phenomena.
On and on.
Yeah, it's UFOs. I mean, here you go.
Creationism and
yes. Some of these ideas die very hard. But that's a whole other conversation that we've had and enjoy talking about. But colony collapse disorder is a tough thing to deal with because it can wipe out a half to 2/3 of a beekeeper's hives. And for commercial beekeepers, this is just a stunning economic hit because they have to have bees in order to have a livelihood. We have to have the migratory beekeepers in order to have a reliable food supply. And so it's something that even if you're not a commercial beekeeper, you want to think about. It's less of a problem for backyard beekeepers. We do have hives that fail, and in fact, every year there's I forget what the agency is. I could look it up, but there's an institution that keeps track of, as well as it can, self-reported statistics from backyard beekeepers. How many of your hives failed this winter? How many of your hives are still going, etc.? And those data suggest that even backyard beekeepers also have die-offs. Now, backyard beekeeping and commercial beekeeping are, in many respects, very different entities. I mean, I can pamper my bees, right? Yeah. I've got 2 hives, and I could be out there every day, measuring and doing other. Well, I don't want to harass my bees, so I don't. But if you've got 500 hives, you're not going to be able to look at every single one of them at regular intervals and assess their health and how they're doing and whether they're growing or whatever. Mm-hmm. So, the fact that backyard beekeepers also have sometimes substantial die-offs depending on region and so forth, and commercial beekeepers have suffered with this for several years. It is worth trying to solve this problem. The major hypotheses are, of course, environmental, in the sense that commercial beekeepers are rough on bees. When you're hauling your bees across the country, you're exposing them to temperature and to humidity differences. Yeah. You're up, you're shaking the heck out of them as you rumble across highways and stuff. Yeah. And that's got to be very stressful for bees. So one hypothesis was that, commercial beekeepers are losing half to 2/3 of their bees because they're just beating them up. They're just providing this very unhealthy environment. And monoculture. You take your bees here and they spend a week fertilizing alfalfa fields, and then you pack them up and you move them here, and now they're doing almonds. That's the wrong order, but anyway. Mm-hmm. And so that's not really a healthy kind of living for bees. Monoculture doesn't give them the variety of nutrients that they need. Okay. So, the environment of commercial beekeepers has been one hypothesis for colony collapse disorder. A very important variable is the Varroa mite. That's V-A-R-O. Try that again. V-A-R-R-O-A, Varroa. This is a mite. It's a parasite of bees, which is not native to the United States or North America. It actually came in from Asia a number of years ago. And it doesn't really, like all intrusive species. It's a new environment. It doesn't have its usual predators, and it's just spreading like crazy.
Right, yeah.
And Varroa mites don't actually, will rarely just flat out kill a bee. Because
that doesn't make sense for a parasite.
Generally speaking, but it weakens a bee, and they're actually fairly large. You can actually see them on the bees. Yeah, really? They're about the size of a pinhead. Yeah. Which, if you visualize a bee, the bee's not very big, and something the size of a pinhead, you can definitely spot it.
Okay.
And so you'd have to have a whole lot of them sucking lymph out of the bee in order to just kill it off. That's not likely to happen. But what it does happen is that it weakens the bees, and they also carry an awful lot of viruses. And I think also there's and bacteria as well. So there are diseases of bees that are spread around by these Varroa mites. So one of the things that both commercial and backyard beekeepers have to do is really monitor the amount of Varroa parasitism. Every hive has it. I'm sure my hive has it. Yeah. My previous hives, which have succeeded or died, I know they had it as well.
Wow.
And in fact, I think I lost one of my hives a year or so ago to a disease carried by Varroa.
So when you say lost, you go to visit your hive and you notice that the numbers get less and less.
Numbers are getting low. Maybe you see... it's not uncommon to see some dead bees out in front of your hive because, like we were talking about, bees have a very short lifespan.
Yeah.
The workers basically work themselves to death, and they, just keel over. Mm-hmm. But if you've got, more than a couple, you might want to take a careful look there and see what's going on. There's one of the diseases is a deformed wing virus that. When the Varroa mite can infect a developing embryo, that's actually where the Varroa mites get into the cells that contain the embryos, and they attach themselves to the embryo.
Oh, wow! So
that weakens the embryo, and then when the creature, when the embryo grows up and hatches out, it carries around this Varroa parasite, but. One of the viruses that they carry is one that can affect the development of wings on this developing embryo. And the wings, they have like lots of hymenoptera. They have 4 pairs of wings, 2 in front and 2 smaller ones in back that are used for balancing. Mm-hmm. And the wings kind of come out a little bit twisted, or they're smaller. They don't really work well. And so those bees... don't make it. They can't fly, or if the disease isn't too bad, they just don't fly very well, and so they don't work. So there's a lot of problems with the Varroa mite, and Varroa mite is a very good culprit for colony collapse disorder.
Wow.
The third major hypothesis is neonicotinoid pesticides. Uh-huh. And the neonics, as they're called, for obvious reasons. It's a lot shorter than saying neonicotinoid. The neonics is a class of pesticide that are used fairly widely in canola, rapeseed production, and many other crops as well. And there have been a number of studies, mostly in Europe actually, showing that neonics are toxic to developing bee embryos and adult bees as well. The hypothesis of the effect of the neonics is that it affects the bee's navigation system, because one of the indicators of colony collapse disorder is that bees hatch out, they orient, they fly off, they are working for a while, and then they don't go home. they wander off, they can't find their way back to the... They can't
sort of tugs at the heartstrings.
Yeah, poor little things.
Yeah.
And so, of course, your hive decreases in number because your bees don't come home.
Back.
Yeah, I mean, that's a real problem. And what seems to be, gelling, and I'm certainly not a bee researcher, goodness knows, but what appears from, a very far outsider's perspective is that it's probably all three. For commercial beekeepers, they do stress the bees a lot. They expose them to crops that have neonics. And Varroa is universal. I mean, you work hard to control your Varroa, and there's miticides that sometimes people use.
Oh, really?
There also are non-chemical ways of dealing with the mites, and of course, just trying to avoid avoid robbing and avoid other things that expose your hive to If you can get your hive relatively Varroa free, you can keep it relatively Varroa free if your bees are not out robbing others, because that's where they pick up mites from other hives, or other hives trying to rob your hive will bring mites in. So you try to keep the robbing down. But crime does not pay. If you're a bee who robs, you are exposing yourself to illness. So it's probably all three of those factors for us backyard beekeepers, where we pamper our bees and give them this wonderful environment where they aren't exposed to the kinds of stresses that commercial beekeepers have. depending on where you live, your bees may be exposed to neonics. Here in very green Northern California, and especially Berkeley, I don't know any neighbor that uses any kind of pesticide, neonic or not. So I don't have a lot of worry about my bees doing that. But, just because I know my neighbors, if they go over a few blocks of people I don't know, who knows what they're using. So at any rate, colony collapse disorder is a serious problem with honeybee production. Or honeybee maintenance, and a serious problem for pollination of food crops.
Yes, of course it would have to. We'd have to roll on. Now it's interesting to see what you have in your backyard, and then to try to visualize it on an industrial scale. These massive stacks of
hives.
And your hives, for example, have what, 4 layers?
Mine are much smaller, although it's possible. The standard hive configuration is what they call a brood box, which is a deeper box.
That's where the entrance is, right?
Yeah. We all tend to use these Langstroth hives, which are rectangles that I should know exactly how tall they are, but 1.5 feet or something like that, less. And each of these boxes can hold 10 frames. So that's a standard box.
Yeah.
And you use the deep box for a brood box. That's where the queen will develop. The workers will develop. Will draw the comb, and the queen will lay the eggs in the cells, and the workers will raise the embryos and count them and all that. And then I also have expanded my brood area. You can do that by putting a second brood box on if you are planning to have a really big hive. And some people do, that's fine. I put a smaller box on top called a super, as in super in the sense of above. It's a medium-sized box. It also has 10 frames, so they're same. They nest on top of one another. And this is about a 6 or 7 inch tall box, and I'm using one of those to sort of expand my brood area. But then I've got what's called a queen excluder, which is a little grate that keeps the queen, because it's the spaces between the wires of the grate are wide enough to let a worker bee through, but not wide enough to let a larger queen through, so it excludes the queen from anything above it. And I've got another honey super, another medium box on top of the queen excluder, and that was the one that we got. That's
what we did yesterday. Yeah. So when you harvest the honey from that, you're shooing away some of the bees, but you're just basically getting honey. Yeah.
There's not going to be any brood in there. There's not going to.
Yeah.
When we were looking at Anna's hive yesterday, I pointed out that this one frame had a very classic distribution. On the left side, across the top, and on the right side, you saw there was capped honey, where they were storing the honey around the outside. And then in the middle was brood, rows and columns of cells that the queen had laid eggs in, and the workers had capped, and they were raising brood in there. Which is a very classic kind of pattern, and that would be repeated in any number of frames. That's good, but it's often really nice if you want to harvest honey, which we do in many cases.
Absolutely.
Is to you don't want to take a frame of brood and be spinning out you don't want to kill your bees.
No.
You also don't want to have little bee parts in your honey, so it's good to have the frames with honey that you're planning to harvest separate from the frames with honey that also have brood in them. That you're leaving that honey for the bees to eat, and they'll consume the honey in those frames and in those cells, and then they'll fill them back up again. So there's a lot of recycling in the bee world.
Yeah. Well, what a fascinating thing. I mean, I had no idea. You see documentaries on TV over the years, and occasionally they're inside the beehive with David Attenborough or something like that. And everyone's familiar with the classic shape of the standard beehive.
The hexagon, the hexagonal cells.
The cells and all of that. But I must say it was really, really interesting to don the gear, open up the hive, lift up the bits, the frames, and the massive bees there, and do all that sort of thing. So, folks, why not look into beekeeping? It's an interesting thing to do if you've got some time and you've got a backyard or something like that. And the results, as you heard a little while ago, as we munched our honey biscuits.
The results can be very rewarding. I will put in a plug for backyard beekeeping, actually, because you're increasing the genetic variability of the European honeybee, which is the bee that we all use to do this with and to raise honey from. The commercial beekeepers are doing the best they can. They go through an awful lot of bees. They are subjecting their bees to a lot of artificial selection for being able to resist the various treatments that they're subjecting them to for varroa and other diseases and stuff. Speaking of artificial selection, there is very strong selection on the varroa mite against certain miticides, which already have become obsolete.
Oh, wow.
And so that's kind of scary because the miticides, bees are insects, mites are mites. They're different. They're different varmints. So a miticide will kill a mite and is not supposed to kill an insect. Doesn't always work that way. The miticides used to control varroa are tough on bees, so you don't really want to use them unless you absolutely have to. But so there's all sorts of selection going on, good, bad, or indifferent, in the commercial hives. But one thing that backyard beekeepers can do is they can deliberately select for characteristics. There's a beekeeper north of here. He's actually a commercial beekeeper, but he's very oriented toward scientific beekeeping. That's actually his website. And he is trying to select for varroa-resistant bees. And backyard beekeepers can also be increasing that genetic variation and maintaining the stocks of European honeybee. So the more backyard beekeepers we have, the better off we are. The less we're likely to lose all of our bees, shall we say. The less likely we are to have a really disastrous crash in the bee population. So thanks for reminding them. Check with your local provincial or state beekeepers association. There's very likely one. We have ours are by county. The Alameda County Beekeepers Association.
Right.
Sometimes they're citywide. But if you Google, beekeepers in blank city, you're going to find some sort of reference to. And beekeepers are the best. They will be very helpful in mentoring you and helping get you out of jams.
Well, I saw that the other day when you visited your neighbour to help her out with her bees. Look, folks, I won't put a list of your local beekeepers association on the show notes this week because there'd be endless pages and pages for around the world. But yes, if you Google that, I'm sure you'll find what you're after. Well, again, I could recommend. I might do it when I retire. I might be like Sherlock Holmes and sit there and.
If it was good enough for Sherlock.
Eugenie Scott, thank you.
This was so much fun.
Quackwatch, your guide to quackery, health fraud, and intelligent decisions, operated by Stephen Barrett, MD. Quackwatch is now an international network of people who are concerned about health-related frauds, myths, fads, fallacies, and misconduct. Its primary focus is on quackery-related information that is difficult or impossible to get elsewhere. Articles on quackery include quackery, how should it be defined, how it sells, 26 ways to spot it, how it harms cancer patients, 7 warning signs for bogus science, why health professionals become quacks, and many more, including in-depth looks at acupuncture, chiropractic, homeopathy, naturopathy, and much more. Visit www.quackwatch.com. The sounds of New York City. I am approaching Times Square. It's a Friday evening. And to say it's bustling is an understatement. Thousands of people. And we're turning the corner now, and my goodness me, I am looking right down the famous Times Square.
It's so beautiful.
But apart from the spectacle of the lights you're probably familiar with from TV and movies, the famous Times Square, I'm just surrounded by the most... Everywhere I look, there's bizarre things going on. I'm surrounded by novellas, actually.
Hello.
Of the female variety.
And freaking Disney characters everywhere.
There are Disney characters. There's Mario. We just passed Spider-Man. There are all these weird red rocking chairs which spin around. And thousands upon thousands of people just here to look at the spectacle of Times Square. Shall we move closer to the light? What do you think? Let's do that. It's a balmy evening. It's very well lit, as you can imagine. And there seems to be a commotion going on up ahead. Let's see what we can find down here. It's probably a street performer, a busker, I expect. But we are walking closer and closer to the Coca-Cola sign. We're going towards the light, are we? Okay, that's the way.
Goodbye, cool world, the light. You're going to be stuck in here forever.
It might... Oh, no, there's a way through the crowd, actually. I can see that near the subway station.
Yeah.
And, it's a huge crowd. I've never seen such a crowd around a busker before. That's remarkable. He's a dancer or something.
What did Julia?
We've lost one of our party. It's a group of dancers. Okay. It's some sort of acrobatic act, I think.
Yeah, I think. All right,
let's keep walking, yeah. Pushing my way through the crowds here. But everyone's very good-natured. It's no problem whatsoever. Lots of families here. Lots of families. As we get closer and closer to the actual square itself. Looking around me, I can see giant screens, incredibly lit, advertising everything you can imagine with scrolling ticker tape things. Thousands of, obviously, tourists taking selfies and photographs of the spectacle.
Stand right there.
And my photograph's been taken. I'm doing a live report for the Skeptic Zone, and I'm getting my photograph taken. There we go. Let's get a bit closer now. You've seen Times Square in the television and the movies, but I guess the thing that's really striking me about actually being here in person is the volume of people here. Everywhere. Sitting, queuing up for ice cream, in and out of stores. Everybody, as I said, seems to be good-natured and just out for a good time to look at the spectacle. It's quite something. It is quite something.
So, see, this is the triangular
building. So you got roads going off on either side.
Right, yes, I know this view, yes. From the movies and TV, of course.
Right.
But it's interesting, it's sort of mirrored on our other side up there somewhat. Yeah.
It's so cool.
I suppose you better introduce yourself for our listeners. Who do we have here?
Autumn. Autumn Novella.
It's a novella. And?
Yes. And Jocelyn Novella.
Jocelyn, and your husband is, of course, Steve Novella.
Yes.
Somewhat known in certain circles.
Sort of.
For a new podcast called The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. And we've lost one. She's looking at the performance, I think.
Her name is Julia.
Julia's looking at the performance.
Will be making her way.
I'm sure we'll see her in a minute.
Like this.
So we're moving further into Times Square.
Not as bad.
And we have a couple of characters here dressed as the Statue of Liberty with flashing crowns. They look quite good, really. Doesn't the green one look good?
Yeah.
Wow. So we're deeper and deeper into this amazing experience, and I don't know, it keeps getting more crowded in a way.
Yeah, this section's another crowded section up here.
Okay.
See where everybody's sitting on that? See those sitting on those seats? So people sit there and have pictures taken of themselves there. So that's
right.
another crowd.
Okay. Well, as we try to make our way through the river of people, the ocean of humanity, which is sort of now in Times Square. Thank you very much, Novellas, for
this was so much fun.
Guiding me here. And it's just a wonderful experience. Thank you for listening to The Skeptic Zone. And my word, what a pleasure it has been and still is to be here in New York. It's, apart from the terrible heat and humidity, wow, it's been hot and humid. But we've had big showers too, big rain, just pouring rain. Brief, but pouring rain. But I must say, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, cats and dogs, there's something about New York I really like. It's got a certain something. It really does. I find it suits me very well. I hope to be back. Everyone tells me to be back in the autumn or the fall, when the weather is a bit cooler. So I might aim to do that one year. I think that would be pretty good. I've seen so little of this city, and I want to see so much more. Something to aim for, I think. And a big, big thank you to the New York Skeptics and the New England Skeptics who have been putting this conference together under some difficulties, it must be said. Not their fault. There was some problems with the building, which they resolved. And from the point of view of the speakers, I think, and the attendees, it's just been a wonderful convention. And thank you very much to Michael Feldman and everybody who has been looking after me so well. Coming up next week on The Skeptic Zone, I'll bring you some interviews from Nexus, maybe James Randi, Harriet Hall. I think I interviewed some other people. I'll get some more interviews tomorrow just before I leave. But as always, it's always a bit of a mystery to me to see what comes up by the time another week goes by. But for this week, from New York City, this is Richard Saunders, signing off. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for contacts, an archive of all episodes since 2008, and our online store. Please support the Skeptic Zone by following us on Twitter @SkepticZone, liking us on Facebook, and leaving a review on iTunes. You can also show your support by subscribing via PayPal for as little as 99 cents a week. The Skeptic Zone is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian Skeptics Inc. or any other skeptical organisation.
little pause while we go around a corner
please, because I'm just...
Car coming.
I've just got a mental blank.
Yeah, we just wait for this car to go. And there's another one coming out of Uncle Tom's, famous pie since 1933. Different world when tradies wear earrings. My side's totally clear to the horizon. Getting onto the road. Okay, and again.
Okay, so somehow I think that'll probably make it into the bloopers. He normally puts things like that in the bloopers of the podcast afterwards. Dr. Karl took...